Iran coordinated a simultaneous 4-missile strike against the Lincoln, not in separate waves, not against different sectors at different times, but 4 consecutive impacts at the exact same moment. All 4 at once, from 4 different positions, aimed at the same single point on the Lincoln's hull, the central engineering sector at waterline level, precisely where Khorram Shah 4 had flooded the engine room weeks earlier. Iran had calculated that if all 4 missiles targeted the identical point, the Lincoln system would be forced to intercept 4 converging contacts in the same sector simultaneously, and that the probability of at least one of the 4 penetrating the engagement boundary in that scenario was significantly higher than the penetration probability of a single isolated missile. 1 missile against the Lincoln's aegis. Interception probability 91%. 4 simultaneous missiles against the same point. Probability of intercepting all 4 simultaneously 68%. 32% probability that at least one would reach the hull. Iran had accepted those 32%. All 4 missiles were of different types to maximize engagement difficulty. A Zulfikar with a depressed trajectory, a Kalij Fars in sea-skimming flight at 6 meters, a Fateh 313 standard ballistic, and a Khorram Shah 2 long-range with a terminal evasion maneuver. 4 types, 4 approach altitudes, 4 different guidance systems, 4 different Aegis interceptors assigned to 4 threat categories, simultaneously in the same sector. It was the most coordinated strike against a single hull point that Iran had attempted in the entire conflict. To understand why 4 missiles of different types converging on the same point was harder to defend against than 4 missiles spread across 4 different sectors, you have to understand the difference between distributed engagement and engagement concentrated in a single sector. When the Ford received 3 impacts across 3 different sectors, each escort vessel's Aegis in the corresponding sector handled its threat with the full resources available for that vector. Distributing threats across different sectors also distributed the engagement resources, allowing each threat to be handled with its optimal interceptor without competition for the same tracking and launch resources. 4 threats in the same sector simultaneously competed for the same tracking resources in that sector, for the same interceptor launch tubes on the nearest escort vessels to that vector, and for the fire control system's processing time, which had to calculate 4 engagement solutions for 4 different missile types at 4 different altitudes, simultaneously in the same airspace and maritime sector. It was not impossible. The Aegis was capable of handling multiple simultaneous threats in the same sector. That was precisely what it had been designed to do. But 4 threats of completely different types in the same sector at the same moment produced the maximum possible resource stress on the system in a concentrated engagement. And under that maximum stress, one of the 4 found the gap. At 0344, the early warning system detected 4 simultaneous launches from 4 positions in the Hormuz and Fars regions. 4 simultaneous motor thermal signatures. Classification completed in 14 seconds. A Zulfikar, a Kalij Fars, a Fateh 313, a Khorram Shah 2, all with converging trajectories toward the Lincoln's central engineering sector. The alert reached the Lincoln in 18 seconds. The Lincoln's Aegis entered maximum coordinated engagement mode. Interceptor allocation was calculated in 8 additional seconds. The Fateh 313 ballistic, Standard Missile 3 Block 2 Alpha for exo-atmospheric engagement, launched at 0346, 14 seconds. The Khorram Shah 2 Long Range Standard Missile 3 Block 2 Alpha with post-evasion parameters adjusted from the protocol learned in previous engagements, launched at 0346, 22 seconds. The Zulfikar depressed trajectory, Standard Missile 6 for high-speed terminal engagement, launched at 0347, 08 seconds. The Kalij Fars sea-skimming at 6 meters, Standard Missile 2 Block 3 Bravo with a backup interceptor for extreme low-altitude terminal flight engagement. Launched at 03:47, 14 seconds. 4 interceptors of 4 different types, one for each Iranian missile of its corresponding type. At 03:51, Standard Missile 3 intercepted the Fateh 313 in the exo-atmospheric phase at 94 km altitude. Destruction confirmed. At 03:52, 14 seconds, Standard Missile 3 with post-evasion parameters intercepted the Khorram Shah 2 after its terminal evasion maneuver. Detonation at 4.2 meters. Destruction confirmed. At 03:53:08 seconds, Standard Missile 6 reached the Zulfikar in the terminal phase at 31 km altitude. Intercept at 3.8 meters. Destruction confirmed. 3 of 4 missiles neutralized. The Kalij Fars, in sea-skimming flight at 6 meters above the water, was the 4th contact. Standard Missile 2 had been launched toward its calculated intercept point 8 kilometers from the Lincoln. The Kalij Fars executed its standard terminal evasion maneuver at 3 kilometers from the Lincoln. A descent from 6 to 3 meters altitude and a course change of 1.4 degrees to port. Standard Missile 2, with its active radar seeker, lost discrimination of the Kalij Fars at 3 meters altitude above the water. Sea return saturated the seeker in the final 800 meters of approach. Standard Missile 2 detonated its fragmentation warhead at 31 meters from the Kalij Fars. 31 meters. Enough fragments reached the Kalij Fars airframe to damage its terminal guidance system, but not to destroy its motor or its warhead. The Kalij Fars, with damaged guidance, continued flying toward the Lincoln's central engineering sector, following its last compromised trajectory without active correction. The Lincoln's central engineering sector close-in weapon system activated engagement at 03:53, 4 seconds when the Kalij Fars crossed the 3-kilometer threshold. First burst from the close-in weapon system at 03:53, 52 seconds. The Kalij Fars at 2.4 kilometers. The 20mm rounds reached the Kalij Fars airframe at 2 points. The inertial navigation system was destroyed. The motor continued functioning. Without guidance and without inertial navigation, the Kalij Fars continued in a straight line at the speed and on the trajectory it held at the moment its guidance systems were destroyed. The straight-line, unguided trajectory of the Kalij Fars pointed directly at the Lincoln's central engineering sector, exactly where its guidance system had been directing it when it was destroyed. The second burst from the close-in weapon system detonated at 03:54, 02 seconds when the Kalij Fars was at 1.1 kilometers from the Lincoln. The rounds destroyed the Kalij Fars motor. The missile began descending in a glide from 3 meters altitude above the water, without propulsion and without guidance. From 3 meters altitude in a glide, the Kalij Fars had approximately 12 meters of horizontal glide range. 12 meters of glide from 1.1 kilometers from the Lincoln. The Kalij Fars impacted the water at 108 meters from the Lincoln's hull. The 650-kilogram warhead detonated on water impact. The detonation at 108 meters from the Lincoln's central engineering hull sector generated a high-intensity pressure wave that reached the hull in 0.003 seconds. The Lincoln's central engineering hull sector received the direct pressure wave from 650 kilograms at 108 meters distance. The impact was sufficiently violent to deform the hull externally at 7 points of the first watertight compartment on the port side amidships, and to rupture the welds of 3 interior bulkheads in the same sector. Gulf water began entering through the deformations and ruptured welds at 03:54, 08 seconds. The damage control team for the central port sector activated immediate response. The bilge pumps began operating, teams began sealing the deformations with emergency patches. The Lincoln listed 1.9 degrees to port. The list was reduced to 0.6 degrees in 11 minutes. 12 crew members at central port positions were injured by the pressure wave and by the sudden movement of the list. No fatalities. The Kalij Fars had not struck the hull directly. The detonation at 108 meters had been sufficiently powerful to cause real structural damage without direct contact. At 0401, the Lincoln transmitted its engagement report to Central Command. 3 missiles neutralized by Aegis. 4th, Kalij Fars, with guidance destroyed by the close-in weapon system, impacted the water at 108 meters from the hull. Pressure wave detonation. 7 deformations in the first watertight compartment, port side amidships. 3 bulkhead welds ruptured. 12 wounded, no fatalities. 1.9 degree list in compensation process. Propulsion operational. Aegis operational. Catapults operational. At 0408, the first Super Hornet launched for retaliatory strike from Catapult 1. The blockade continued without interruption. The balance was as follows. Iran had coordinated the most concentrated attack of the entire conflict. 4 missiles of 4 different types converging simultaneously on the same point. 3 intercepted cleanly. The 4th, with guidance destroyed by the close-in weapon system, continued on a straight trajectory and impacted the water at 108 meters, producing pressure wave damage without direct impact. The 32% probability that at least one would reach the hull that Iran had calculated materialized partially. One reached 108 meters, not the hull directly, but the distance at which its detonation caused real damage. This was the closest any engagement result had come to the target across all 4 missile attacks in the conflict. This story is not about the 4 missiles or about the close-in weapon system. It is about the difference between a strike that reaches its objective and a strike that comes close enough to cause damage without reaching it. The Kalij Fars did not impact the Lincoln's hull. Its warhead detonated at 108 meters, and that distance was sufficient to deform steel and rupture welds in the first watertight compartment. Not exactly what was calculated, enough to matter.